Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are talking about a piece of Wolfram language design related to question functions. Just to give some context here, let's see, what is this? Should I run this just for context?
Yeah, that's
to what the
a
heck
perspective
we're talking about?
guide page that we'll want to add for 13, something like it.
Okay. Okay, so let me just get oriented here. Okay, so we have a question object which represents a certain let's see, I need to update documentation, presumably.
Everything was checked in like last Friday, so I'm sure you've done it since then.
I'm going to do it again anyway,
sure,
just in case we edit something else. Okay, so let's just understand what's going on here. So a question object is a representation of a question. Is the moon made of green cheese or something? Yes or no? And it encodes what the right answer is and so on. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. An assessment function is an option for that says, like in a geolocation or something like that, what counts as the right, how you assess it.
It's not an option in the explicit sense. It's an argument. It's the second argument to question object would be an assessment function. But for simple cases, you don't even need it. When you get to when the assessment gets complicated, you use an assessment function. So an assessment function is...
hold on a second. This is very weird. My Zoom crashed and now it thinks I'm screen sharing, but I'm not.
It looks to me like you are.
Well, but it's frozen because the thing crashed. Let's see. Well, maybe this is better. Let's try this. Okay, it cleared. Server must have had some timeout. Okay, keep going.
Right. So assessment function isn't an option. It's a symbolic object that you apply an answer to, like the user's answer to, and it gives a result, an assessment result object that's basically saying correct or incorrect, and here's your score. Right.
Okay. Can I run this create notebook?
No, thing? Lower in that thing, there's a demo notebook that will, you'll have to install a couple Packlets, but you can do
what should I do? I mean,
if you want to poke around at it, you should do the demo notebook thing in here.
Okay.
Right there at the bottom.
What do I need to install? Can I just run this?
It's in the demo notebook does the Packlet installs.
Okay, so I just run this.
Just run this.
That'll open a new notebook. Then there'll be more cells to run. So that top, right.
Okay.
Right. So that's installing 2 prototype Packlets that will let everything work in 12.3. Most of this stuff will be 13 features. So this is a way to let you run it now.
What is this now? So
that's a question object. It doesn't have the latest design, but it works.
Okay, so this is. So where's the answer?
Between that last thing between. So since this is a simple one, you can give a test function right there that is applied to the answer and gives true or false. But if in a more complicated cases, you'd use an assessment function.
Okay, so if I run this, then I get this. I put that to wherever I put it. I press submit. And see. I haven't bought a gallon of milk in a long time.
I'm going to open a corner store in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, good. I'm glad.
Fair enough.
Okay. Okay.
Right. And we have updated design from this. It's not implemented, but I don't want to get
So
too
what
bogged
is the
down into that
prompt
today. That's the image and the text in a column or a grid or something.
I
like
see.
that.
Okay, fine. So if I uniconize that, okay, fine. Okay, I get it. Okay, so let's review again. So question interface, that was what we developed last time, as I recall.
That's right. That's new. We have documentation in CVS that's futurized to look at in this meeting if we have time.
Okay, all right, okay.
So here's a more complicated one.
So select category is a type of question interface, is that correct?
That's right.
And so we have question interface. That's a thing for which there will be documentation for the various different question interfaces. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Prompt choices. What's a category?
Right. So evaluate this and you'll see it'll probably make more sense. So this is like sorting or categorizing, matching, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Right. So we're calling it category. That's a little bit weird here, but if it was something like, tomato on the left and fruit and vegetable on the right, the terminology makes more sense.
Well, maybe we shouldn't use something which is incomprehensible. What does categories?
Right. We have cycled on.
What is choices and categories? What is choices and categories? What does that mean?
So in this interface, choices is the left drop down and categories is the right drop down.
Why don't we just call it left? Is it always going to be a drop down?
For select category, it can. Well, we could always expand it with additional options. Where
I don't
control
think select
goes
category is the right name for this. I think this should be called, match. Match drop downs or something.
Yeah.
Select category was incomprehensible to me. If it's a question of, if it was a fixed thing on the left and you said, is this a fruit, vegetable, whatever, I don't think that's even a category thing. That this is very obscure.
Yeah.
This is basically match sets or something, or match
pairing maybe.
Yeah.
Right, because you're not doing all the things on the left; you're just doing one of them.
Okay.
In this case.
Well, but match that's an obscure case that you're doing a single matching one thing on the left with one. This is it's like, well, you can answer whichever question you want. Pick a president. This is a very obscure thing.
Right.
I don't even know whether this case is interesting, but certainly its name is incomprehensible.
Okay. It's certainly easy to change the names within question interface. The assessment function, where it has the term category, is something that we want to, have consistent. That assessment function could go in multiple interfaces, is the idea.
Okay, but then I don't know whether category is the right name. So we need to. Okay. So let's look at this here.
And so that little next input cell, create QA form authoring notebook, has the prototype. It's a lot of work to do. And we had the long meeting about UX on the normal form notebooks yesterday. A lot of that'll probably have implications here. So
what is this one roughly going to look like?
So it's like the form notebook, but instead of inserting things that are like form objects, they're inserting things that are like question objects. And the submission action always has assessment. Right. And then it marks up generally it'll mark up the question objects with check.
By the way, this should have a different colored header or something, because otherwise people are going to be irreducibly confused.
In Friday's UX design meeting, we're bringing some initial graphic design for question object interfaces in default notebook and the Q&A form notebook.
Okay.
Yeah. This is hopefully not the meeting we're in right now for designing UX here.
Okay, good.
But the workflow is important to discuss. So these question objects, their natural home is in these Q&A form notebooks. That's where they do the best stuff. You can certainly use them anywhere, but this is where they're interested.
So what I start off with is my big test.
Exactly.
And then I say, who invented the bicycle or whatever.
Well, typically the prompt is going to be in the question object. So
why is that?
I think that the idea is that you have these question objects that are sort of modular and you can move them around.
Fine. Well, that's fine. Okay, fine.
So,
all right. So then,
but certainly putting something in there like factoring quadratics, right? Source, whatever. History, bicycle history questions. Yeah.
Okay. So then that goes in a question object, which is created from the insert GUI, basically.
Right.
Okay. And why is it that this can't just be in a standard form notebook? Why does this need a different kind of form notebook?
Well, the submission action is much different.
Yeah, there's no dealing with custom submission or submission actions at all in Q&A form notebooks. It's all about the assessment. It's all.
So walk me through that for a second. So, I mean, I fill out the questions and then I peel off a thing that's actually going to be the test that somebody's going to do.
Right.
Who is that, by the way?
That's Bob Barker, former host of The Price is Right, where they always ask people what normal things cost.
Oh, okay, fine.
That was the game show.
Okay. Okay. So I'm sorry. So then you fill this out. This is the kind of that turns into a specific copy of the quiz to be used by students or whatever.
Exactly. You cloud deploy it, you email it around, whatever you want, and then students can take it.
Okay. And then, but that has umbilically connected itself to wherever the answers are going to go. Is that correct?
Exactly. Right. So what we want people to do is deploy, like in the settings menu here, there's a choice to deploy a collection of APIs essentially that serves as the back end of these things, right? You can create one of these notebooks and run it locally and it'll store the assessments in the notebook and then you could upload it back to the teacher, but that's not a great workflow. What we really want people to do is do the assessment in cloud, where it basically deploys an external bundle with an assessment endpoint and several other endpoints for both the student and the teacher that handles everything.
So you create this thing. This notebook is, so for example, if you were a fifth party, who knows? We've got a lot of parties here, where you are a, professor makes quiz. Mm-hmm. Professor licenses quiz to publishing company. Publishing company sells quiz to another entity. Okay. Mm-hmm. So then that means that quiz, which was created by Professor One and connected to, to her, cloud account, right?
No, well, the authoring notebook is not. In that case, you're passing around the authoring notebook, and it's not connected to your cloud account until you.
No, but assume that you.
If you've already generated, then that scenario isn't working. You need to pass around the authoring notebook, and that's
right. But that's what I'm saying. I'm saying post. Look, it's like source code versus generated stuff. Let's say that they want to pass around. Let's say that they've got multiple sections of their whatever it is, and that the grading should go to different people. And they're not going to pass around the source notebook. They would like to pass around a built notebook, but the built notebook already has burnt into it its destinations. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's an issue with that. Perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether or we tell people just pass around the source. But so the idea is, as soon as you have built it to make a shiny quiz that you can give to people, it has also burnt in the callback, basically.
Right. I mean, and we could make a utility for changing that because basically it's all one cloud deployment generally. So
no, we couldn't. But think about it. No, we could. Well, it depends on what kind of utility, because the source is the only place. It's at the level of the source. Okay, the source still has the assessment information in it. By the time it's deployed, the assessment information is hidden behind an API.
The tool would have to copy the whole cloud object as well as change it in the source. Yeah. So there'd be permissions to handle and that sort of thing.
Right. So let's assume right now, as our boundary condition right now, that people pass around the source if they want to pass this around. And we'll worry about the other case later.
Right. Teachers pass the source to teachers. Teachers pass the built one to
students. Can we get it written down what the outline workflow is for this as what will eventually be a workflow, piece of workflow documentation? So as I understand it, right, what you're doing, what you're telling me is you have a Q&A form notebook. You fill out the questions and the assessments in the Q&A form notebook. You deploy the Q&A form notebook saying, and you get two things from that. You get, this is the actual notebook that you can pass around to people. Presumably it can be deployed either on desktop or cloud. You can pass it around to them, or maybe what we do, given that it's all of a cloud, it's all cloudy, that what we do is maybe this is what you've done, that deployment causes you to get a cloud object that represents the quiz to give to students. So
we haven't done that. We haven't done that automatically yet, but it makes sense.
Right, but so then what you deliver to people is essentially a manifest of here are the assets that you have, right? So this was your source. Here's a link to your source. You know, you may as well upload the source to the cloud, it seems to me, by default. And then what you can give people is a manifest. Here's your source. You can give to somebody else if you want to. Here's the built for test takers, so to speak, version. And here are links to the back end that allows you to see what got submitted and all those kinds of things.
Right.
Okay, so then this becomes, so what you're effectively doing then is you author the Q&A notebook, but then what comes back from that is a cloud object. When you deploy that, you get back a cloud object, which itself points to multiple cloud objects that are the various stages of using the thing.
Right. And the important, and all of that information should be recoverable from the cloud object. So the important thing is to keep track of the cloud object.
Which cloud object?
The one that hosts a bundle of APIs and stores scores.
Well, I understand that, but what I'm suggesting is that this, which you could author on the desktop, you deploy it, you get a single cloud object back. That cloud object is itself a notebook that describes what the other cloud objects are.
Oh. Like an index.nb.
Yes, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So
that seems reasonable. Yeah, we could do that.
So that way, when you have that thing, it's like, that's my, geometry test thingy.
Yeah.
And then what you do is then you can store, you put them in a directory in the cloud and you store them there, and that's where you're keeping them. And then as soon as you want to make use of one, you can either download its source from that manifest, edit it, make the next year's version, or you can just use that student thing. Now, I think a thing we're going to want is, let's say you give this test once, you get a bunch of students.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to want something where it's a different section of students or something that are going to do that test, right? So in other words, you don't want whatever the back end is that accumulates results.
Right. We have a clear API on it that would wipe it out and reset it, which might be enough. We don't want that. You want to keep
you want to archive things. No, we just want something where, look, what I think should happen is,
you definitely want to archive things. A lot of teachers would just get their scores once, put them in their LMS and start over.
Whatever.
Yeah.
That's their mistake. And then one day that we'll get this phone call from them. Oh my gosh, I did all these students filled out all this stuff and I lost everything.
Yeah. It makes sense. The archiving makes sense.
Okay. All right. Okay. So then
this design that you just described of this cloud object that refers to a bunch of other cloud objects, does that intersect pretty closely with this cloud service objects design that you also?
I don't know which cloud service objects design.
Bob,
the cloud service deploy. Yeah. It would. Yeah. It's basically that.
It's similar. Yes, it is similar to that.
Right.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I.
And he's describing an index page in that bundle that we upload, which makes sense. We hadn't really ever thought much about what happens when you visit that page, and it definitely makes sense to have it be some
right. And so maybe the return from the deployment is an association with those URLs.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is, but it's usually behind a button, right? You hit generate, and you never. Yeah, we can put that in a dialogue.
You could get back. Okay, so maybe there are two things you might get back. You might get back a pure single link, or you might get back the essentially scraped version of the manifest page, right? So what you could get is something that says, where you could get back an association where one entry in the association is the manifest page, and the other entries are the individual things that appear on the manifest page.
Schroeder, do we have a place where we would show that right now? Or do we just give them back the built notebook? Do we put a doc cell
right now?
Stripe in the authoring one.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do we put a result stripe in the authoring notebook that would show?
No, we don't do that, but we could.
Right, because we need a place to show that when you're using the buttons. Right?
Yeah,
we don't have an output cell.
Right, fine, but I mean, then the primary, the primary sort of result from build it is the built notebook, but then all these other things like where your APIs are and all that kind of stuff, you have to point to that as well. I personally think that a better strategy would be to return the manifest page, not return the built notebook. And the built notebook is a click from the manifest page, if they're all in the cloud.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know when you say return, you mean pop open a dialogue?
No, I mean,
there's no output cell. There's no output cell to return something into.
Oh, I see what you're saying. In the case where it's done with buttons.
In the case where it's done with buttons, which is going to be the
then pop. Okay, then pop the manifest notebook somewhere. Right, actually show the manifest notebook. You can show. I don't know.
We're opening a notebook instead of it being the generated notebook. It can be something nice with a button that opens the generated notebook.
I think that would be great.
That goes that makes sense.
But then the thing you open there is a desktop notebook that points to a bunch of cloud objects, but presumably also has a mirror of itself in the cloud.
Right. It's very similar to the index page.
Right, but in what directory has it put itself in your cloud account?
Well, if you click on Access in Cloud, it asks you where to put it.
I see.
And if you don't, it's just an anonymous UUID, which isn't great, but there's not a better thing. It's like the cloud publish dialog, sort of.
Fine. Okay. All right. So independently is misspelled. Come on, guys.
It's probably me. I misspelled that word 90% of the time I read it.
Okay, that's one of the problems. Once you misspell a word, you're toast forever. So this is generating a question object with a question interface. Okay.
So this is our hook to support things like question pools or adaptive quizzes, things like that. This is our concept here, where it's a question generator, and the first argument is a function that returns a question object, and then you have to set up triggering. So the second argument, we have a very murky design, but basically it would tell it when to trigger. And if you're just using it in a normal, so if you're just using it in a normal notebook, it'll trigger when you apply values to it, like I show below. And those values, if you put an association in there with gen, where I have open close, if you put an association, the values will be passed to the function itself. But in a Q&A form notebook, what we can do is have fancy stuff like after they answer question 4, generate questions 5 through 7, right? They'd all be triggered based on the user has answered question 4. And the values that are passed to them would have automatic things, which most importantly would be the assessment result objects for everything that they've answered so far in the quiz. So the question object that is output could depend on,
Okay,
how
hold
many
on.
they got
Hold on.
right.
I'm pretty confused here. Okay, so
Okay.
then what's going on? You're describing normally in a Q&A form notebook, there are specific question objects that are just like, that when the Q&A form notebook is built, this question object statically says, here's what I am.
Exactly.
Is that correct? Now,
Yes.
what happens if one of those things depends on, like something like, who is the vice president right now? Right. And that's something where we'd have to do a lookup to find the answer.
Right. So, the assessment function can certainly use the entity framework without any issue.
Okay. What about if the question depends on, what about if the statement of the question depends on,
then you're going to use a question generator.
Okay. So wait a minute. So then you'd have to use something different. Right. So in other words, the Q&A form notebook by default deals with statically stated questions. Correct?
I think that's right.
Do you
want to correct that, Sylvia or Stephen Schroeder?
No, yeah, they're just, it's those questions just sitting in there.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, so its primary mission is statically stated questions.
Right.
Were you to want a dynamically stated question, you would use question generator.
That's the proposal here.
Okay, fine. I'm not sure it's necessarily the right name, but I understand the point. So then what a question generator is essentially a delayed question in some sense.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Okay.
If the symbol delayed weren't so intimately tied to cloud deployments, we could maybe get away with using that around question object, but it won't work.
Tied to cloud deployments? What?
There's second arguments. There's cache persistence. There's all this stuff that just doesn't make sense here.
Right. Okay. But there's set delayed. Who knows? Okay. So then the point that you're making here is that in the generator, in addition to the state of the world that it can pull in dynamically at the time of generating the question, it also can pull in the history of that student's activities.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
One of the designs,
what time did they start? What time did they answer the last question? All these things that
so it can
test writers might want to know.
It can pull in basically whatever it is that you would get from the full result, the full sort of thing from this quiz being taken. Whatever incremental version of that exists at the time when this is asked for, it gets fed.
Right. Assessment result object is the symbol that represents that.
Okay. So then just to understand, at the end of the quiz, the assessment result object that you get back is identical to the assessment result object that you would feed into a question generator were you to use a question generator at the moment just before you finish the quiz. That
sounds right. I'll let Sylvia or Schroeder correct me if there's some detail that's not true about that.
It's just, that's exactly right.
Okay. All right, fine. Okay. All right. So now, okay, I think I get it. That makes sense. The interface, don't worry about a fancy GUI interface to this question generator thing in the Q&A form notebook. That's an advanced feature.
Right. Okay.
I mean, just let them write code.
Right. Certainly for the first argument, maybe something for the triggering. I think the triggering might be nice to have.
What is triggering again?
So when should the question generator generate and turn into a question object when the student opens the notebook after the previous question, after some other question was answered at 2 p.m. on Tuesday? What does it look like when it hasn't? I mean, so wait a minute. You've got a quantum quiz. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
You've got a quiz that shows up and certain features of it are not yet measured. And so what does it look like for question 7? Question 7 is a superposition of states somehow. Is that what you're telling me?
Sure. Not knowing quantum physics. Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's it's like a delayed object. I mean, you can think.
No, but I understand that. But I'm asking in the actual thing, student gets the quiz. The quiz has 18 questions in it. Okay. Question 15 is not yet known what it is, because
Right.
that will depend on what else was in the
Exactly.
We
quiz.
brought this up very briefly with Jeremy Davis the other day, and he
Exactly.
suggested something similar to a slideshow. So it essentially just goes to
Okay.
like the next slide.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's sort of two ways. We could either have the whole notebook kind of do paging, or we could just append things on the bottom
Yeah.
and have scroll.
Well, or
Have it get
I mean,
longer.
the case, the kind of it hasn't been generated yet case. It's almost like if you were to see the whole thing, there will be a great big gray area there.
Right.
where it
He
hasn't
didn't
yet
want to
been
worry
generated.
about what
We-
that looked like.
Right. I mean, you see what we have above with your output 22 in just a normal notebook. I figure we could have some sort of like gear made out of question marks would look cool. But in the Q&A, in the built Q&A form notebook, I think it should just be invisible.
I think that will be super confusing to people. I'm like, okay, imagine the following scenario.
I think if the button says on the previous question says continue instead of submit, then it makes sense immediately.
Okay, I worry about the following scenario. Student who is a brilliant test taker opens the quiz. There are 11 questions. Student says, I know exactly how to pace myself for 11 questions. Oops, they get to question 10. 3 more questions pop up.
Mm-hmm.
Upset.
That's a good point.
But I do agree with Bob that if it said continue, or if there were some indication of the total number of questions.
We could,
Which
yeah.
may be variable, because it might actually generate more questions
You're-
than some
yeah,
adaptive
you're right.
learning thing.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it needs to have some indication, and I have no idea what
Well-
these things look like. And go ahead.
Well, I mean, even if it's generating an unknown number of things, then showing it doesn't solve that problem.
Well, it does if it indicates that this is an ungenerated, marsh of questions or something.
Right. Right. And
Right.
even on the guide page, we have a very futurized cell called question generate while that is our solution for potentially generating many questions.
Okay, hold on.
That's not
So-
for 13.
Right. But so I think that the case, we don't know what it is yet case. If it's a continue, the infinite slideshow, so to speak,
Mhm.
it's kind of funny, but it really depends on use cases, and it depends on, look, I can imagine this being used. Well, this is an assessment-based thing, right? So this is not going to be used for this type of technology might be relevant, and we tried to make it with ask function for medical diagnosis stuff.
Right.
Do you have this problem? Do you have that problem? Well, if you have that problem, then we want to ask you this and this and this.
Mhm.
Okay, but I don't think this is relevant to that, because this has the notion of, this is very much like test the human type thing, right? As in assessment functions and so on, where they are, right, rather than building up state, which is what ask function is about. Right. Am I making sense? But I think it would be good to try and unify those ideas.
That incremental assessment result object is also building up state, right?
Ethan on live stream is asking about some type of assignment that involves running code. I have no idea. No idea. I have no idea. This is don't know. Somebody can look at that. I think if this is something about computer security and I have no idea. This is not meta. I don't know what it is. If your quiz is about your computer, that's never mind. I'm not even going to think about it. But okay, let's come back to this thing about when is the question generator. So essentially what this is this is a delay until something happens, right?
Yes.
And what, we have a notion of cloud deploy of delayed blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But that delayed has only one event that causes it to be triggered. Okay, the event that causes it to be triggered is merely the
An HTTP request.
yes, right. But what this is saying is you could do a bank triggering of all these questions, or you could trigger them at the moment where they're being asked for, so to speak.
Right.
Ethan is asking the reasonable question, how would we recreate challenges.wolfram.com using this framework?
Right, that makes sense. So in the assessment function, we have these equivalence types that we want one of those fairly soon to be code that will hook into the code equivalence that Wolfram Challenges uses, or something very similar to it. So that's definitely one of the things we're going for.
Right.
So that would do that.
Ethan suggesting integration with Kaggle. I don't know exactly how their whole framework works, or even whatever. Okay. All right. So what do we? I am going to run out of time here in just a few minutes. But what is our what else can we look at here quickly? I mean, you want me to look at documentation pages here?
Right. I mean, if you wanted to look at the question interface or question generate documentation page.
No, well, what about question? This question object, have we done?
Question object was in 12.3. There are updates in CVS up for.
Okay, so let's look at question interface.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot of docs. I don't know if we'll finish it all in whatever limited time we have. Yeah.
Wow.
So, these names represent maybe a solid hour of thinking. So they're not nothing, but we're certainly open to changing it all.
Okay. So let me just understand what this thing basically does. So given type and settings, what the heck is this? So this is wrapped around a question object. Is that correct?
No, this is the first argument to question object. Like we
saw. So
this is
like a form. This is like a form object. Is that right?
It's like a form object. Yeah.
Which we don't call a form interface object. Question object. So this is the analog. Okay, so this is defining when the question is going to be displayed, how will it be displayed?
Right.
And there is a default, presumably, for a given question type, for a given question object, where the question object has.
A lot of times, you don't need to put this in. It's all inferred from the assessment function.
Okay. Okay. All right. So then this is the UI. Now, to understand something, every UI we have here, is it obtainable in a disembodied form through some other interface? I mean, because people, this is one of these things where it's like people use dataset just to format data, even independent of all of its other things, because it has some convenient feature. Are these, this kind of user interface mechanism is something I can imagine people wanting completely independent of, like that pairing interface thing. It's like, well, I just might want that pairing interface, period, without, all of the tentacles of assessment and all this kind of thing.
Right. You can have a question object without an assessment function. It's just kind of like a survey, right? If you don't have an assessment function.
Right. But I mean, my question is, are these in fact more general UI elements?
And I suppose, I mean, we could make it so that you don't need to just wrap the thing in question object, if that saves anything, but you don't need to have a prompt. You can say prompt goes to none.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, that's hacking.
The code is there if we want to have a design for.
Well, my question is, how does this relate to, radio button? Okay, radio button.
So this is a layer higher, certainly a layer higher than control types and specific thing. This is an interface for answering a type of question. It's not a pure.
Has anybody from the front end team looked at this? I'd like to know the answer too.
Who did we have in that meeting a while ago?
Yeah,
Bobby,
Lou was there.
Lou and Ricardo.
Okay, so I mean, my
Ricardo's-
question to these guys is, if we were to invent a higher level named, not quite control type, but interface type, that could be one of these things disembodied to just be used as an interface, right? So we have control types like radio buttons and things. Maybe this is a higher level version of that is an interface type that's just in a thing called, I don't know, interface or something with a name. Does that make any sense? I just hate to build something here that is, only, sorry, this is only available. You can buy this special kind of cookie, but it's only available if you buy this boxed set of other cookies.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll bring that back to them.
Okay. Ethan is commenting, an interesting comment, that an application of this would be getting human labels for machine learning training data sets. That's an interesting thought. Can this be used for that? I don't see why it shouldn't be. It's a good use case. So in other words, you generate you're generating a quiz basically, and the quiz says, is this a fire hydrant or whatever?
Right. Yeah. I don't think we're competing with Google's CAPTCHA system in terms of number of users, but yeah, you could use it that way.
Well, there are more interesting cases for that.
Yeah.
So a question for that would be, our curation team has certainly done many tasks like that. I wonder if there's anything we know, because we certainly generate curation grids from data. See what I'm saying? And I don't know I think it's a little bit of a different case, because what we tend to generate is these giant grids where somebody's going to spend, it's like, is every one of these pictures a tiger? And those things have been pretty well optimized over the years for our curation team. But it's an interesting question. Okay, Ethan is asking, do you have an annotate this image question interface?
We have text completion is on this list. It's not implemented. I think that's on Steven Schroeder's very soon short list. But the prompt could be an image and text completion with
right. But the other question
template.
is there a thing where you get to put a bounding box in an image? We definitely do have things like geolocation.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely we're going to expand the number of sort of clickable.
No, but I think this is an interesting use case that we haven't really thought about.
Right. One of our CBM's interfaces are definitely a design point for us to try to hit moving forward.
No, I understand, but that's for assess the humans as opposed to learn from the humans. It's answering the question, did the human learn, as opposed to what can we learn from the human?
Right. Just my point of like drawing on graphical interfaces is
right.
Is something that we want to support.
Right. Fair enough. I believe, let me just check my schedule here. Yeah, I really need to go in a very short moment here.
Okay.
Well,
so we're thinking about making question interface more general, and we should keep moving ahead on question generator. It seems reasonable, even if
I think so.
Want to revisit the name?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think this should have another meeting soon. Okay.
Yes, of course. Agree.
Okay. All right, and thank you to Ethan on the live stream for this comment about machine learning. It's a good suggestion, and please, can somebody show this to Alan and maybe Johan, or at least to get input on how this relates to what we already have for curation interfaces.
Okay.
In other words, is this relevant to the basic question is this relevant to data cleaning and curation? Can this be used for that? Because we have, there's a whole different project that I hadn't internalized that it's related, is making our curation tools that we've developed over the last 15 years or whatever more, more productized.
Okay.
Right. And that involves, right. Nick is commenting, do we support all kinds of captures? Amusing. I don't really know what those are these days. I mean, yeah, that's a good kind of concept for. I think some of them are a bit irrelevant to us here, maybe, but it's a good concept for what the challenge response, thing looks like. All right, let's wrap up for now here, and to be continued another time.
Yeah.
Okay.